Yeah, so today we're talking about what many consider a hot topic, and that is grammar. So if you watch this video until the end, you are going to make amends, and we will help you to learn to enjoy grammar because we will help you understand that grammar is just a foundation, that language is a living being, how grammar is like Yoda, that context is everything. It's okay to make mistakes, how you probably already know more than you think, and finally, that you should learn what to use before how to use it. But before we get into any of that, I want to let you know that if you are new here, every single week we help you to understand fast-speaking natives, to be understood by anyone, and to connect to the world. Just like our fan Charlie, who says that for the first time in his life, he's actually able to understand. So we're gonna help you a ton too. It's really simple. Hit that subscribe button and the bell below and you won't miss a single one of our new lessons. Now, before we really jump into the bulk of today's lesson, do you know what grammar really is? Now, grammar is simply the structure of the language. It's kind of how we determine what words to place where. Now, while this is super important and it's really crucial that you study the grammatical structure when you're learning another language, this isn't the sole thing that you should be focusing on. And learning grammar is so much more than just memorizing the rules. I'm sure that you have encountered that natives break the rules all the time. You might hear in a different song, just for example, from the Beatles. They have a song where they say, "She's got a ticket to ride, but she don't care." Now in school, I'm sure that you learned that it should be he, she, it doesn't care, but we can see that natives will be really flexible with the language. All right, so I want you to take a moment to think of the English language a bit like a house. Now, if you were looking at a house, grammar would be like the foundation of that house. It's what gives it structure and helps it to stand. Now, if all you have is grammar, then your house might be a bit bare. It might be a bit empty. You might not even be able to live in it. And that is why you might have things like word choice, for example. Now this might be like the color that you paint the walls or the sofa that you have in your living room. So it's when people come and visit your house, how are they going to perceive it? How is it going to make them feel emotionally? Now, when we speak a language, we don't usually have such a conscious knowledge of how it works. Most natives aren't actually aware of the grammar rules. And I'm sure if you think about your knowledge of your own language, this is probably the case unless you're actually a teacher of it. However, knowing the rules and studying them can be very empowering if you're doing it in the right way. And the main point that you really should take away here is that grammar is like the compass that makes sure that we're all speaking the same language. So Wade Davis said that language is a flash of the human spirit. Now what this means is that English speakers worldwide are constantly reinventing the language. It's always growing and changing and evolving. Now, what was spoken in Shakespearean times, for example, is not at all the same grammar that we're using in today's English. Just to give you an example, you probably learned in school that one way to form the future tense is by saying I'm going to. However, you will almost never hear natives say it this way. You might hear very often I'm gonna. But did you know that we shorten it even more nowadays? You can encounter people saying I'm unna instead of I'm gonna, or shortening it even more all the way down to I'ma. Now just to give you another example, centuries ago, English actually had two forms of the pronoun you. So for the singular, we would say thou, and for the plural, we would say ye. Now, nowadays, most people will probably just use one word for both the singular and the plural, and that's you. However, if you go to some places, for example, in the south of the United States, you might hear people instead using you all for the plural of the second person of the you. So they say you if they're just talking to one person, and you all if they're talking to a group. Or in other parts of the US, you might hear people saying you guys to refer to a group of both men and women. And furthermore, the rules are going to vary depending on where you're using the English. So if you travel to the UK, you might find some little bit different rules than you would find if you're using American English. So really, when you're thinking about what is correct grammar, you first have to think about where are you actually taking the use of that English language. And in addition to this, modern British grammar and vocabulary and so many other aspects are highly influenced by American English because of all of the media that comes out of the United States. So what's more, grammar rules can be flexible in both spoken and written English. Just to give you an example of this, you can hear certain people use ain't all the time when they're speaking, but you probably would not want to use this if you're doing some sort of formal writing. Now finally, it's really important that we remember that grammar tries to explain what natives naturally do when they speak a language. So grammar is really complex and an ambiguous system, and there are even discrepancies between the leading grammarians. So if you're a Star Wars fan, then you already know that Yoda's wisdom gave Luke guidance on his journey to help him decide what the best next step to take was. So in the same way, grammar is like an old friend that helps you to make informed decisions when you're speaking or writing in English. It takes you to the next level and helps you to give a more accurate sense of your ideas. So it helps you to be independent, but it should be used in a constructive way. So this is just in the same way that you'd use a flashlight to find your way in the dark, or that you would use floaties to help yourself feel more secure when you're swimming. So you should use grammar in your favor, not against you. Friends push each other forward. They don't hold each other back. And we would love to be your Yoda on your English learning journey and help you to learn grammar the natural way. So a really great place to get started is with our Power Learning mini course. You can join that absolutely free. You can learn more and sign up by clicking up here or down in the description below. Do you remember when you were a child learning your first language? Did you have to learn all of the grammar rules before you could start speaking? And nowadays, do you know all of the grammar rules flawlessly to be able to communicate in your native language? So in the very same way when you're learning English, it's useful to know the function of different grammar points before its rules. So a good idea can actually be learning what to use before how it's actually constructed in a grammatically correct way. So just to give you an example of this, say that you want to talk about something that you did in the past, but that you don't do anymore. So you would use used to or would. Now by knowing this, then you can know how you would correctly conjugate this in the affirmative or the negative, or what kind of verb form needs to come after this. So I would be willing to bet that this is not how they taught you at all in school. It's okay to figure out the grammar rules as you're going about your journey learning the language. You don't need to have them all memorized before you can start speaking. Just to give you an example, when I was learning Catalan, I didn't study the grammar at all for the first few years. I actually just started using it first to be able to understand different things that I enjoyed, like music or TV series, and to start being able to speak with different friends in that language. And then a couple years ago, I was really determined to actually start studying the language to be able to kind of polish up some of my mistakes. And so when I started at that point studying grammar, it made perfect sense to me because I had already encountered these things hundreds of times, if not thousands. It wasn't just some abstract set of rules that I felt like I had to memorize. So that leads us perfectly into the next point, and that is that context is everything. So without context, memorizing the rules in a grammar book won't do anything for you. And that's why it's so great to learn English by reading or by watching series, because you'll actually see the different grammatical structures used in context. And sometimes these can actually be absorbed without you even realizing them. And this is exactly what we'll do for you in that Power Learning mini course that I told you about earlier. So to help you understand this a little bit better, let's look at an example. So the present continuous can be used in a variety of different functions. Let's look at 4 different ways just so that you'll understand why context is so important. So first off, she's eating dinner. That's why she can't answer the phone. He's studying for his SAT exams. People are texting much more than they used to. When we move to Italy, we're buying a house on the coast. So as you can see, if you don't know what you need to express in a certain context, knowing that you form the present continuous by adding the verb to be plus a verb plus ing is going to be completely useless to you. However, schools will often teach grammar blindly in this way. And also, as we touched on earlier, the place where you grew up, the region that you live in, and even the family that you grew up with can also influence how you speak the language. So let's take a look also at how important context is in informal and formal situations. So we'll look at different examples, and both of them can actually be correct depending on what context that you're in. So first off, in which team did he play? Which team did he play in? Or another, neither of us like soccer. Neither of us like soccer. So as you can see, it's nearly humanly impossible to know and be aware of all the different variants of a language and what is considered correct in each of them. And again, some things might be considered grammatically incorrect, but natives still do them anyway. So grammatical competence is the ability to make sense of grammatical sentences in at least one language and transfer that to another. So you may already be able to take some things that you know in your native language and apply those to English. You're not starting completely from zero. Now, in addition to that, your previous exposure is absolutely essential. So have you ever had that feeling that you are speaking or you're writing something and you just know how to say that correctly and you're not even sure how to explain why you know that? Now, this is based on the previous exposure that you've had to the language. You've probably seen that used someplace, and your brain has been able to kind of connect the dots, even though you can't explain it. And you've probably learned some sort of different grammatical structures that maybe you haven't even formally studied yet. And this is exactly why constant exposure is so crucial. The more that you expose yourself to a language by listening to it and reading it, the less time that you need to sit down formally studying at your desk. So one place we can see that this is important is that sometimes two different varieties of saying one thing can be used in the same variety of English. So American or British, for example. And on the other hand, only one form might be accepted in another variety of the language. So just to give you an example of it, let's look at these sentences. So, is Jack here? No, he's just gone home. Now, who do you think would say that? Brits or Americans? Now, actually, you could hear both Brits and Americans using it that way. However, if we change the dialogue a little bit and instead it becomes, is Jack here? No, he just went home. Who would say it that way? So you could know that that person is an American speaking because this is accepted in American English, but not in British English. So let's take a quick look at another example. So say someone calls me on the phone, I could answer and say, hello, is that Susan? Now, who do you think would say it that way? Would that be a Brit or an American? Now, that would be a Brit that would say it that way. An American would actually say, is this Susan? And by the way, if you want to learn more differences between British and American English, then I highly recommend that you check out this video. You'll find that by clicking up here or down the description below. It's okay to make mistakes. Repeat it to yourself like a mantra. Making mistakes is a crucial part of the learning process. I mean, how many times did you fall down before you learned to walk? Now, while having a reasonable amount of correctness is important because people need to be able to understand you, it's quite unnecessary that you can perfectly speak the language. I mean, natives don't even speak the language perfectly. We talked earlier about how natives often make mistakes, and these mistakes can actually become the norm, so much so that eventually they're accepted into what is considered correct grammar or correct English. So just to give you an example, the word data was not always said this way. For the singular of this, we used to say datum, which comes from Latin. So just to give you an example of this, only having one datum for my paper was not enough to prove my theory. And it has gained different meaning and been used as a singular, uncountable noun ever since. So to give you an example, they transferred the data to a flash drive. So we don't know if they're talking about one piece of data or multiple pieces of data in that case. So if you go to Starbucks and you order coffee, the barista, of course, is not worried about whether or not you are correctly applying the entire table of contents of your grammar book. They just need you to be intelligible enough so they know what you're asking for, they can place your order correctly, and you can enjoy a nice cup of coffee. Remember, if you hold yourself back for fear of not speaking flawlessly, then you are bound to forget what you've already learned. Remember that grammar is not the most important thing in the world. Alright, so we've talked about a lot in today's video. So in it, you remembered that grammar is the foundation of the language, but its rules are not set in stone. The language is constantly changing and evolving, and the grammar is too. Understanding the grammatical rules will empower you, but they should only come second when communicating. You already know more than you think, so trust your guts. And making mistakes is okay, they're a natural part of the learning process. So I want to know, what are your main takeaways from today's lesson? What surprised you the most? Write it down in the comments below and let's start a conversation. And now it's time to go beyond the classroom and live your English, and you'll learn the grammar along the way. What's up, guys? I'm Ethan, your Real Life English fluency coach, and I have a question. Why is it that so many English as a foreign language speakers feel the need to apologize when they speak English? Or as I've seen countless times on the internet and even in the comments on our channel when they're writing.